Welcome to Circle of Hearts Radio. Journey with Grandmother Allayah as she enters her magical world of relics, sacred sites, and ancient crystal skulls. Meet with exciting trailblazer authors and individuals shifting the consciousness of humanity. Send her your questions to be answered on air on her monthly segment, Ask the Oracle. And now your host, Grandmother Allayah, in the sanctuary on the airwaves on OMTimes Radio.
Welcome to Circle of Hearts Radio. I am Allayah, and thank you for being joining with me into the sanctuary space. Today, I'd like you to meet a very trailblazing author. He caught my eye actually months ago because the subject of Lemuria kept on coming to my mind, and I went on an internet search. I came across Frank Joseph. And let me tell you a little bit about him for those that don't know him. He was the editor-in-chief of Ancient American magazine from 1993 until 2007. He is the author of several books, including Advanced Civilizations of Prehistoric America and Before Atlantis, and he lives in the Upper Mississippi Valley. Today we'll talk about the lost civilization of Lemuria, the rise and the fall of the world's oldest culture. And I also would like to, try to sneak in a little bit on one of the segments about ancient Atlantis and the coming of the Ice Age, the lost civilization, a mirror of our world. There's a passage I came across in his book, The Lost Civilization of Lemuria, and it goes, when science and myth combine, however, the story they tell in their own way rises above dubious fables and bloodless analysis. They are brought into sharper focus than is individually capable of achieving. When scientists are able to validate myth, an earth-shattering breakthrough takes place, the transformation of legend into reality. Now I'd like to have you meet Frank Joseph. You there?
Yes, I am. Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak with you today.
Yeah, we had a little bit of a scary moment there. I wasn't sure. But that's, how sometimes Skype works with me. Just before we get into the subject of Lemuria, how did that catch your eye, briefly?
Well, I had heard about Lemuria and Mu, as it's also referred to, in a number of rather unconvincing arguments. And so I rather dismissed the whole idea of a Pacific civilization existing thousands of years ago. I thought it was pretty much nonsense until I had an opportunity to interview a representative from the government of Malaysia. At that time, I worked for a St. Paul newspaper called Asian Pages. And this newspaper, regularly featured information about the Asian community in the United States. So I had an opportunity to meet this government representative from Malaysia, and just in the course of our conversation, she brought up the origins of the Malaysian people, which she said came from a sunken kingdom that vanished in the South Central Pacific many thousands of years ago, and that this was a folk tale that was pretty well believed by most people in Malaysia today. I thought, boy, that's kind of interesting. That sounds like Mu or Lemuria. So that sort of sparked my interest. I figured, well, if you have a folk tradition that has rooted itself so deeply in the traditions of a specific people, then perhaps there's something to it after all. And I began not only reading on the subject, but then you can only read so much. I began traveling. I traveled throughout Asia. I traveled through the Pacific and the Pacific coasts of America, Peru, and California, and all the way up along the Pacific Rim, collecting information from native peoples, talking with modern oceanographers and seismologists on the possibility of a a land mass existing in the Pacific. And after about 10 or 12 years of this pretty intense research, I was absolutely convinced that there was, in fact, an extremely important kingdom that flourished throughout the Pacific, a kind of an empire, a spiritual empire. This was not a civilization like we know today. These people that lived so long ago in the Pacific were not interested in the things that we're interested in mostly as a nation. Economic and military considerations to them were secondary or sometimes even almost non-existent. And what I learned that was most important about this ancient civilization, and I absolutely believe this after now more than a quarter century of further research, that I believe that this place, which we refer to as Lemuria, was the birthplace of human civilization. I think it was the place where human beings made the transition, the major step from savagery to civilization, going back about 75,000 years ago. Now, I know that's an incredibly radical statement to make, but it's something that's based, I believe, on as much information as I've been able to gather, and I'm still gathering information on it.
Yeah, I don't think
and
it's...
I believe that this was the mainspring of what we now refer to as modern man.
I don't feel that it's radical coming from our, let's say, the metaphysical or the visionary community. Many of us have had memories, visions, but what I think is fantastic is you've taken, in our communities, we basically say, okay, Lemuria was this huge land mass, but with your research, it's actually proven that Lemuria is a culture. And as I was talking to you a little bit before the show, we take it from the point of, that ETs or, other beings came to the planet for Earth experiences. This is where many of us come from, our thought perceptions. So Lemuria was, let's say, almost like first contact 75,000 years ago. They developed civilization and they spread it, because we also agree that many of the Lemurian more advanced people, the spiritualists, the shamanistic people, when Lemuria had the destruction, they traveled to different parts of the world, to be the shamans, to be the mystery schools. What do you think possibly on that idea, combining your research?
Well, I think it's very interesting that you bring up that the visionary community does not find any of these conceptions about Lemuria radical, because they've already known about them for a long time. And I found that actually to be the case, that the so-called visionary community is just that. They have visions that transcend hard science. Science moves at a much slower pace, quite naturally. It picks up the pieces physically. But nonetheless, science is walking on the same path as the visionary community. The psychics and the people that have these conceptions that extend backwards and forwards in time just run a little faster. But to answer your question about how the Lemurians spread out, my understanding of it is, and you have to understand that the work that I've done on this has been as meticulous as I've been able to do, and anybody that reads my book is able to see that I have footnoted a great deal, and I've provided a tremendous amount of reference material. So everything I say, I try to back up with solid documentation as much as I can, as much as I'm able. But to answer your question, I'm under the impression that the Lemurians in the beginning developed a high spiritual concept, but they regarded it as something that was jealously kept secret, that was not shared with the outside world. The Lemurians present an almost introverted people in the beginning. In this regard, they were similar to the Tibetan Buddhists.
Uh-huh.
Because at one time, Tibet was sealed off from the outside world. Any outsider was not allowed to have any access to Tibet. And I think that the same thing happened with the Lemurians. However, outside circumstances, changed the history of Tibet, and now, of course, Tibetan Buddhism is spread around the world. And the same thing happened with the Lemurians. Both involved catastrophes.
Yeah.
Amongst the Tibetan Buddhists, of course, there was the communist catastrophe, which was the rape of that country, the virtual destruction of that country, the forcing of the Dalai Lama to leave his homeland. And although it was a horrible tragedy, and the people involved doing it were the exact opposite of Tibetan Buddhists, nonetheless, they inadvertently worked against themselves by spreading Tibetan Buddhism now around the world. And the same thing happened with the Lemurians. With them, it was a natural catastrophe. You have to understand that a society like theirs, which has lasted for tens of thousands of years, over the course of that time, naturally there's going to be a natural disaster of some kind, which will have a very powerful effect on the homeland. And that's what happened with the Lemurians. They underwent a series of natural catastrophes that did not destroy Lemuria, but nonetheless opened up possibilities for going elsewhere. Now, this is not just hearsay or theory. The Native Americans in the southwest of North America, I'm referring specifically to the Hopi Indians above all, have traditions of these foreign missionaries that long ago, in the very beginning of Hopi culture, traveled across the sea and arrived in California and spread throughout what is now known as the Four Corners area, in which Wyoming and Utah and New Mexico and Colorado meet. And it was there that the Hopi and the pre-Hopi cultures were in contact with these Lemurian missionaries who imparted some of their technological and metaphysical concepts to Native Americans. This is preserved in the actual traditions of the Hopi shamans themselves, and has been written about.
I was going to say, yeah, and we'll continue.
So this mission,
the best of the conscious minds in the world. OMTimes Radio, your conscious lifestyle on steroids. As difficult as it is to believe, there are places in Africa where human traffickers sell albino children and their body parts for use in magic rituals. Humanity Healing International is actively working in Uganda to change this paradigm. The Albino Rescue Project finds albino children who are at risk and places them in safe schools and environments where they can learn and grow free from fear. To learn more or to sponsor a child, visit humanityhealing.org. Humanity Healing is where your heart is.
Come heal yourself. What is healing? Healing is nothing but connecting to your all-knowing higher self that already has solutions to all your problems and is always there to guide you. Through this show, we help you to connect with that you are and help you realize the innate potential you have to heal every aspect of your life. So come heal yourself every Tuesday, 11 a.m. Eastern, with your host, Monica Goyal. Namaste.
Hi, this is Sylvia Henderson, intuitive life coach and energy healer. Are you ready to elevate and rise way above your normal? Be sure to listen to my show, Intuitive Transformations, on OMTimes Radio, Sunday evenings at 9 p.m. Eastern. Get the inspiration you need to transform your life.
Host your show on IOM-FM, the radio network of OMTimes Media, one of the more recognized brand names in the conscious community, and is backed by the extensive marketing reach of OMTimes. Hosting a show on IOM-FM immediately connects you with our extensive dedicated community. Free your mind. Expand your soul. OMTimes Radio. IOM-FM.
Well, we're back with Frank Joseph talking about Lemuria. And this book has such great information and actually research. So I truly recommend it. If you've been interested in Lemuria, Now it's time to go past the idea of all the visionary information. We accept that. Now you're going to, in this particular book, and it's very detailed, there is the research. Open your mind to more, bigger possibilities, because now we're coming to the truth. So, Frank, there's so much in this book that I'd like to bring out. But you started with the about the evidence with the Hopis. Maybe we should continue on that vein.
Well, the Hopi tradition was that their earliest ancestors were doing island hopping across the Pacific from a natural catastrophe that destroyed the homeland of their spiritual disciplines. And the Hopi, to this day, the elders, talk about this place, and they use a term, which I cannot recall at the moment, and I probably cannot even pronounce properly. But what's interesting about this long term that the Hopi refer to is that it ends with the name Mu, which is one of the names that's associated with this ancient civilization. It went through numerous names. Lemuria was only one. That actually is the Latin name. Most students of this subject don't realize that the name Lemuria is from ancient Rome, that the Romans' oldest ceremony was called the Lemuria. And the Lemuria was celebrated in mid-May every year. It was a kind of the Roman version of our Halloween, in which they believed that the spirits of persons who perished in this great catastrophe came back annually to visit the living and to be recognized as still living, although in another dimension. And the ceremony, we know a lot about that ceremony, the Roman Lemuria. Part of it was making effigies of these people and then dropping them into the river Tiber. In other words, like going back, they came from the sea and they go back into the sea again. So the name Lemuria has been associated for very many years, for thousands of years, well over 2,000 years, with this lost civilization. However, it's known by different names in Asia. That's because the civilization touched different peoples, and they naturally, in the context of their own culture, gave it their own specific names. Although the name Limu or Lemuria is known across the Pacific, always referring to this lost realm of the dead.
And what I notice in your book, you're constantly bringing out the point of cultures all over the world all seem to have a basic story of either a flood or a catastrophe and people coming over. I mean, this is a constant. This is not just, one culture out of, whatever. It seems to be fact. And you were able to put this all together. And that's why I keep on stressing anybody interested in the subject of Lemuria. Look into Frank Joseph's book. It has so much great information into it. And it has the facts and the research. And you can start putting the pieces together. Is there one place that I was thinking of was Namadol. And I think it caught my attention when we were talking about physical evidence, because there is still physical evidence, isn't there, of this particular place? They considered it a possible weather station?
Well, the place called Nan Madol is not well known to the outside world. It is probably the most remote place on Earth. It's on a small island, just off the northern coast of a small island known as Ponap, sometimes pronounced Ponape. This is in Micronesia. The nearest landfall is about 2,500 miles away. And this island, this teeny island of Ponap, which today is inhabited just by a few rather backward people, features one of the probably the single most outstanding mystery from the ancient world. Just due north of Ponap is an artificial island, a man-made island. It was made on top of a sunken coral reef, and it was made thousands of years ago. It is composed entirely of magnetized basalt. Basalt is a volcanic rock, volcanic like glass, but in this particular form of basalt, it has become magnetized. It has electronic qualities. Mm-hmm. This entire city of Nan-Madol, which the local people refer to as, it means the spaces in between, is of a very peculiar nature. It has grand staircases. It has an enormous harbor, still in existence. It has towers that were originally 40 to 60 feet high. They've been mostly destroyed by jungle growth over time. It has enormous plazas. All the buildings are squarish, and yet none of them have windows. Few of them have anything like a door. It's the most bizarre city you can imagine. It has no real living space. Mm-hmm. What Nan-Madol is, and the only thing we can conclude from it, we don't have enough time in this broadcast to explain all the reasons why we believe this, but Nan-Madol is a power station. It is a work of highly advanced technology that was able to harness the natural forces at work in that part of the world. In other words, typhoons. And it was used specifically to degauss a typhoon, to keep it from becoming destructive. When typhoons would pass over Nan-Madol, and that was the superhighway, it still is the superhighway of typhoons which form over the Pacific coast of South America, travel across the Pacific, and as they do, they gain strength and then smash into the Philippines and cause tremendous amounts of damage and kill thousands of people. This place of Nan-Madol was situated directly in the path of this typhoon highway. And its effect was to degauss a typhoon. What that means is to remove its electronic or its electrical component, and that would in effect just turn it into a thunderstorm and just turn it into a regular rainstorm instead of a destructive typhoon. Mm. And that was done not just to benefit mankind in a general way, because directly in line with this typhoon highway is a place called Luzon in the Philippines. And if you go to Luzon, the Philippines, directly in the line of this typhoon highway, you will find the remains of the largest food factory man has ever created. It's called the Banawe Rice Terraces. An entire valley was terraformed and transformed into the greatest food manufacturing center in all human history. It is now preserved, or part of it is preserved, by the United Nations as a World Heritage Site. So that site, which was the producer for Lemuria or Mu, that fed millions of people, was protected by this incredibly high-tech location called Nan-Madol. Mm-hmm. Now, when I made this suggestion to a number of physicists about 8 years ago, I did so very reluctantly because I do not have that kind of background, scientific background myself, but those were my conclusions nonetheless. I wanted to discuss this with the physicists to see if my idea, my interpretation of Nan-Madol was fantasy, had any real basis in material science. They had an actual consensus in which they said that such a concept would possibly work, could possibly work, and needs to be modeled in order to actually prove it. But they said there was nothing in known physics that would prevent Nan-Madol, which was made up of several billion tons, if you can imagine this, billions of tons of magnetized basalt, so that when the typhoon went overhead, it created a kind of a shared resonance or frequency that pulled the electrical component out of the typhoon, rendering it into a rainstorm. And when this basic theory was presented to the physicists in Michigan at a conference of the Ancient American Artifact Preservation Society. They said that this needs to be modeled and possibly represents a form of technology that is beyond anything that we've made today, and should be looked into, because maybe we can stop the typhoons that were stopped thousands of years ago. The only people that could have created this and did create this were the Lemurians. The Micronesian folk tradition of Nan-Madol and Panap talks about two brothers, sorcerers. They refer to them as sorcerers. This is the way primitive people refer to another people who are in possession of a high technology. And these two brothers came from a place called Kawena-Mesu. And Kawena-Mesu was this great kingdom, they said, that vanished in a natural catastrophe in the South Central Pacific. So you see this story repeated by peoples who are totally separated from one another and completely ignorant of one another, that talk about this kingdom that flourished long ago in the South Central Pacific, and that it produced these sorcerers or culture bearers that went throughout the world spreading this highly advanced technology, and along with it this sophisticated metaphysical idea. And whether it's called Kawena-Mesu or Lemuria or Mu makes no difference. These are just cultural inflections, different names for the same place. The Easter Islanders had the exact same thing. Their story was that their great moais, or these great stone heads that the world knows about, and the high civilization that rose on Easter Island, all came from a place called Rapa Nui, which was the island was originally named after. It was also referred to as Mare Renga, and that Mare Renga was this great kingdom in the Pacific that had all this high technology and spirituality. It was suffering a natural catastrophe. The king of Mare Renga ordered his son, Hatu Matua, to get in a boat with his followers and his family and go to Easter Island to preserve their civilization and carry it on. So the same story is repeated, whether it's in Micronesia or separate. You know, the distance between Easter Island and Micronesia, we're talking like about 4,000 or more miles, and yet the tradition's there.
Yeah, no, we'll continue this when we get back.
Bringing you the best of the conscious minds in the world. OMTimes Radio, your conscious lifestyle on steroids. Simone Milasas would like you to know that business can be fun, which is why she wrote the book, Joy of Business. What if you could have the joy of business rather than the stress and struggle? Most of the time, the only thing stopping you from a thriving business is you. In the Joy of Business book, Simone gives you access consciousness tools and pragmatic ways to get out of your own way and to create the business, life, and living you know is possible and beyond what this reality says is achievable. Business is joy. It's creation. It's generative. It can be the adventure of living. You can purchase your copy of the book through Amazon or Joy of Business website, www.accessjoyofbusiness.com.
Imagine receiving healing, vibration-raising energy as you listen to the radio. Energy that flows effortlessly to you. Imagine exploring all things metaphysical, sharing in an ongoing adventure. Join me, Karen Smoot, along with my co-hosts Lisa Victorson and Wendy Weber for Immersion into Source every Wednesday, 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, right here on Om Radio.
Looking for inspiration?
Want to be inspired?
Not sure where to go?
Find Mark and Kim every Wednesdays at 3 p.m. Eastern on Inspired Living.
Topics will elevate consciousness and range from metaphysics to the human and social experience and all things spiritual.
Welcome to an inspired community that offers support, encouragement, and new ways of thinking. You are the inspired and the inspiration.
Being a radio host on IOM FM allows you to build your show on a rich platform with the power of the internet to fulfill your outreach goals and connect with a very specialized and global online audience, unlimited by time and distance. OMTimes Radio will provide you with web relevance, a recognizable conscious brand, and with the standard of excellence that has accompanied every single OMTimes endeavor. Host your show with OMTimes Radio Network. Free your mind. Expand your soul. OMTimes Radio. IOM FM.
Well, we're back with Frank. There's so much great information in this book. I really suggest finding it, The Lost Civilization of Lemuria by Frank Joseph. It's published by Inner Traditions. You can find it on the Amazon. There's so many interesting tidbits that we only can tease you with a few of these, but it's really worth the read. So going on, Frank, there's more physical evidence of the Lemurians. I think in your book you also say it can be traced genetically, DNA, in different parts, in different cultures. So there's a common strand of DNA. I'm mostly thinking of what comes to my head at the moment is the red-haired mummies that was found, I guess going into Western Mongolia, China. They must have crossed the land bridge that connected the area at the time. Go ahead.
Well, no, I know what you're talking about. There are two interesting things about the racial character of the Lemurians themselves. There's been a lot of talk about that. Were they actually Polynesians as we know them today, or Micronesians? Or were they separate, a different people, and do any of their descendants exist anywhere? These are interesting questions, and I think they can be answered just briefly in the short space of time we have here. These traditions that we hear, these oral traditions of people in Micronesia and throughout Polynesia, and even along the coastal areas of the Pacific Americas, talk about the Lemurians as being a fair people, as being not particularly tall in stature, but as white-skinned and light-eyed and fair-haired. An example of that is in Hawaii, where they refer to the Menehune. The original story of the Menehune. Today the Menehune are kind of remembered as just dwarves. But the older versions of the Menehune, the ones that were discussed with the first missionaries that visited the Hawaiian Islands in the 18th century, talked about the Menehune as being the original inhabitants of the Hawaiian Islands. And they came from the sunken kingdom, the same as all the other stories go, and they're described as being fair-haired and light-eyed, even golden-haired from time to time. The same stories are found in New Zealand, on the other side of the Pacific, thousands and thousands of miles away. And then this Nan-Madol that I mentioned earlier on the island of Panap, when the Japanese were doing excavations, the first archaeological studies were conducted by Imperial Japan, as a matter of fact, back in the 1930s. They found a number of these very bizarre coffins. These coffins were made out of platinum, and which is really hard to imagine because platinum is not found anywhere near that part of the world, and certainly not in the kind of abundance that made these platinum coffins. And inside the coffins were found people of exceptionally tall stature, much taller than the Micronesian people who inhabit that area today. The platinum coffins were taken back to Japan and melted down because platinum was very valuable for electronics, and the Japanese did not have access to platinum hardly at all. How platinum was ever found in the ancient times in that part of the world is a total mystery. So it seems to suggest that the Lemurians traveled very far during their time and were able to go to places that had access to platinum. But you're right, there is a real connect going on between the legend of these, the legends, consistent legends found all over the circum-Pacific area of these genetically different people associated with this lost kingdom, whatever they want to refer to it as, and the genetic and physical evidence that's been found.
I would say even in Peru, you have the stories of Viracocha. I'm not sure if I'm saying it right, but he was supposed to be a fair-haired, white individual. And
yes, red hair, as a matter of fact.
Oh, really? And then if you look at Peru and in the steppe, I don't know. It's not the steppe, temples, but it just seems like all this, the Lemurians, when they traveled there, they brought some of this culture to Peru also. I didn't want to forget Peru into this mix of cultures. That
absolutely. The Incas preserved a tradition, an important, valuable tradition to them. It was the origins of their history, in which they talked about 4 waves of immigrants who arrived in Peru over the course of time. And each time one of these waves of immigrants arrived, they brought new forms of technology, new forms of political organization. The earliest of these was led by Contiki Viracocha. His name means sea wave or bow wave, refers to the wave of parting at the bow of his ship. Mm-hmm. And an interesting thing about Contiki Viracocha is that he's described as very tall, wearing, he arrived with his sons, who are also known as Viracochas, and they physically resembled him. He's very tall. He had red hair. He wore a long flowing robe with all kinds of flower designs on it. Now, a statue, an accurate statue of Contiki Viracocha, was preserved by the Incas at the center of their capital, Cusco. And when the Spanish arrived under Pizarro, the conquistadors assumed that they knew he was a foreigner. He bore no physical resemblance whatsoever to the Incas themselves, to the native peoples of Peru. So they assumed that this was Saint Bartholomew, and they kept the statue around for quite some time because they said, this is Saint Bartholomew, who supposedly traveled sometime. Mm-hmm. And one of the reasons why they call it Saint Bartholomew was because Pizarro was aware that the friars, the priests that were traveling with him, wanted to eliminate all physical forms of Inca culture as being demonic and non-Christian. But this statue was so beautiful that Pizarro, in order to preserve it from the destruction of the friars, said, "Oh no, this is really a statue of Saint Bartholomew," and that helped to preserve it for really quite a long time. But after Pizarro passed away, he was actually murdered, but after he died, and his conquistadors, they became old men or passed away. Then the church went back and says, no, that's not Saint Bartholomew, that's Contiki Viracocha, and his pagan, and they destroyed the statue. It's unfortunate that was lost, along with most other examples of Inca culture. At least all the examples of Inca culture that they could destroy, they could lay their hands on. But nonetheless, that description of the statue is remarkable. Yeah. Just as an interesting thing about what happened to Contiki Viracocha, according to the Incas, they said that after he and his sons arrived and founded civilization in Peru, that he said he had to leave. And the people were very upset about this. They wanted him to stay on. He said, "No, my sons will stay here and will become the Inca emperors, but I have to leave." And the story was that he got into a kind of a chariot, a kind of a container of some kind, mm-hmm. and it was called an orichana. That's what they referred it to, as an orichana, that Contiki Viracocha got into. He got into, and it burst into flames and shot up into the sky, and he was never seen again. Isn't that a fantastic story?
No, I mean according to this community,
people talk about UFOs and ancient aliens. That's the closest I've ever been able to find. But I mean, that's their story. That's not something that was made up by me or anybody else. I've got the source for that, and it actually is quite well known. But I mean, that sounds like he got into something, and that's pretty interesting story. I just thought I'd have to throw that in.
Oh, I'm glad you did, because I'll tell you, to me, and I know to other people, that listen, follow this show, this makes perfect sense. That's why I was so excited about your book, because it puts together so many pieces. Originally I said the show is too short, but we have like 3 more minutes before the music comes on again. But what I wanted to bring forth was people always, I did, and I know other visionaries, or metaphysical community, always thought Lemuria was a continent. And I think you mentioned in your book there's really no basis to think it was one geologically, like a landmass.
Well, yes, that's understandable why people would refer to it as a continent. As a matter of fact, the great James Churchward, he wrote a book called The Lost Continent of Mu. And the reason why people would think that was because this land, this kingdom, had tremendous impact and influence over much of the world. At least half of the world, civilized world, was deeply influenced by this civilization. But all evidence, not all, but most evidence seems to suggest that there is no continent at the bottom of the Pacific Ocean. Now, there is some disagreement about that, and there might have been. There is something called the North Pacific Rise, which is a very large landmass, maybe not quite continental, but it's very large. And it's like, between north of Japan and Alaska. It's very large. It's possible that might have been the location for Lemuria, but I think more realistically, Lemuria was a very powerful culture, or a people, that was spread out over archipelagoes, or island arcs, many, many thousands of islands. So we're looking at a relatively, at least a culturally, homogeneous and comprehensive people that were spread out over many lands rather than one large land mass in itself.
We'll continue this.
Bringing you the best of the conscious minds in the world. OMTimes Radio, your conscious lifestyle on steroids. The number one reason girls drop out of school in sub-Saharan Africa is lack of access to feminine hygiene products. The Pads for Schoolgirls Project, an outreach of Humanity Healing International, is changing this paradigm by setting up sewing programs at schools, teaching girls a vocational skill, while producing the reusable pads that help keep them attending classes. The girls pay it forward by making and giving pad kits to other girls in need. To learn more, visit humanityhealing.org. Humanity Healing is where your heart is.
September 23rd, September 23rd, September 23rd. Mark that down on your calendar. Put it in your phone. Whatever you do, circle that date. 9 p.m. Eastern on OMTimes Radio. Yes, it is the return of the Joe Show. We will come back live with Season 9. Wow, 9 seasons. I can only think of 4. Winter, spring, summer, fall. Salt, pepper, oregano, and thyme. No. Anyways, we don't have that much time. We're going to be back live September 23rd. Don't forget, 9 p.m. Eastern, here on OMTimes Radio.
Join Elliot Jollish, the business therapist, each Tuesday at 5 p.m. Eastern for the Elliot Jollish Hour, as he interviews business experts on your behalf. And you're invited to email your business questions to questions@ecjgroup.com for answers, live, on air every Tuesday at 5 p.m. Eastern on the Elliot Jollish Hour. Host your show on IOM-FM, the radio network of OMTimes Media, one of the more recognized brand names in the conscious community, and is backed by the extensive marketing reach of OMTimes. Hosting a show on IOM-FM immediately connects you with our extensive dedicated community. Free your mind. Expand your soul. OMTimes Radio. IOM-FM.
Well, we're back again with Frank, and we're already in the last segment. There's there's so much wonderful information in this book, and we only can touch upon so much because I want to get into his other book about Atlantis. But as a teaser, you have to get Frank's book, The Lost Civilization of Lemuria, by Frank Joseph, because there is some interesting information about the Nazca lines. Now, that's for our listeners to go and find out this information in the book, because we're not going to give that to them. But it really opened my eyes on something. So check out this book. There's wondrous material in it. And right now, Frank, I want to touch upon your other book, Atlantis and the Coming Ice Age. Pre-show, we were talking about cycles of civilization, which, I know we'll get into it. But Atlantis, basically, you could say, all right, well, would be a follow-up on Lemuria. Their culture came into bloom after the destruction of Lemuria.
No, Atlantis and Lemuria were contemporary.
Oh, they were contemporary.
The Lemurians, yes, they were. The Lemurians were the predecessors of all civilization, and they were the great missionaries of civilization and metaphysics. And they traveled around the world, and one of the places that they traveled to was a large island, no longer exists, about 250 miles due west of the Straits of Gibraltar. It was a very beautiful island. It was inhabited by a rather primitive people, and it was there that the Lemurians established an outpost, one of many outposts that they had around the world. This particular outpost, though, about 250 miles or so from the Spanish coast, flourished and became extremely prosperous, so much so that it became almost a mirror image of Lemuria itself. The trouble was that over time, the people that lived on this island, which they refer to as Atlantis or the island of Atlas, became more interested in non-metaphysical ideas, became more interested in self-indulgence, and they became the precursors of our modern civilization. The things that concerned them were economics, political expansion, military might, personal wealth, those sort of things. And as a consequence, they drifted further and further away from the Lemurian ideals that had been originally espoused throughout the world. And these people, the Atlanteans, also used their high technology mostly to manipulate the environment, not to live in harmony with it, to manipulate the environment for self-indulgence. And as a consequence, they suffered what it would today be known as an industrial accident, in which the forces that they used to exploit the natural riches of the earth backfired on them and destroyed them utterly and pushed them into the realm of legend or mere myth. And in this regards, this society, this Atlantean society, bears a very strong resemblance to our own. We also began as a people that lived in harmony with our natural surroundings, but we have now got to the point where we are a totally self-indulgent people. We are more concerned about the limited horizons of what can bring us the most physical comfort. And as a consequence, we are exploiting the environment, and not only the environment, but our own life origins, just to make sure that we can continue to live the self-indulgent life. And that will lead to the same social suicide that wiped out this previous culture. And that's why I've called the book, what it's called is that Atlantis is a mirror of our time.
But I think this is not a doomsday book. What I had gone from it is, you bring out this information, but you're giving people, all right, here, look at this, see where we're going with what happened in Atlantis, as you mentioned previously, and, look how it's almost duplicated in the Americas, and make your choice. You can achieve a golden age, or you can achieve going downhill. this is let's say the metaphysical community always says that they mention the good parts of Atlantis and all the good technology, etc., etc. But if it continues to take a materialistic view, this country or this world, we could be like Atlantis, but we're at a pivotal point. We can make a choice. We can choose to more or less go into what they had called the Law of One, which is more of a community and Lemurian aspect. Does that make any sense?
Yes, I think that's basically what I was trying to say in the book, that it's not a book about doomsday, that we're all going to die, that sort of a thing. But it does show that societies before ours that were highly advanced made some wrong turns, and in doing so completely obliterated themselves. But something of their greatness always survived, like when Rome was destroyed by itself. It really set itself up for all the barbarian invasions that finally brought Rome low. Nonetheless, the ideals and the concepts and the scientific and even the metaphysical greatness of the Romans contributed seminally to the Renaissance. There would have been no Renaissance without ancient Rome. The word Renaissance, of course, means a rebirth. What it referred to is the rebirth of Greco-Roman civilization, and which is what our civilization is now. Our modern civilization really began with the Renaissance. We can trace ourselves directly back to that. And so any society that achieves greatness may even destroy itself, but will still leave a legacy for the future. I think that's possible for us as well.
And what I'm curious, I know in both books you mentioned Edgar Cayce. Now, I haven't done that much reading on Cayce. I did in my younger years. But did he ever foretell possibly how, well, I guess actually everything is, all possibilities. Things could go one way or the other. I was wondering if he had an idea if, we're going to strain ourselves out.
Well, Edgar Cayce was an uneducated but a very decent man. And he suffered an illness early in life that somehow created some kind of a change in his brain, and he was able to have these visionary trances, which turned out to be incredibly accurate. Not always. He was a human being like everybody else. He made his mistakes, but nonetheless, he did have some valuable things to say, especially when it came to understanding how people were going through some of the same difficulties in this life. He said that they were still trying to resolve from difficulties in their past lives. And some of those were supposedly in this early civilization of Atlantis.
That seems pretty much, really, if you look at an objective view, it seems like maybe we are the original Lemurians, and we keep on repeating ourselves and, repeating the lessons. And hopefully, according to the metaphysical community, that we're reaching a point that we can return back to the golden age of Lemuria. That, we finally learned all our lessons in this Earth school.
Yes, yeah. That's true. We found great stuff like that. But before there can be any return or a reenactment of any kind of a golden age or making our own, there has to be a great purge. All of the dross and the mistakes of today, which have turned our civilization into the opposite of what it should be, that all needs to be purged, and that will happen. So there's no doubt that we're going to go through a difficult time, which all these forms that we see today will be gone, will have to be thrown out violently, and will be. And unfortunately, innocent people suffer along with this, but that is just the nature of the world. And but after that's done, after this great purging takes place, then I believe that there's this wonderful opportunity for not a reenactment of a golden age. We'll have our own, but it'll be based on our understanding of the past.
Yeah, that's why I think I found it so important. Like I said, I know I keep on stressing these books of yours, but no, seriously, because you take a lot of people that are considered visionary, of course, are thought, you live in your head, you think, you're living back in past visions, etc., etc. But what you do in your books is you bring reality. You say, okay, well, let's look at all the myths, all the whatever the shamans shared in their cultures, etc. Let's look at this. Let's bring out the research. And like I said, there's a lot of research, a lot of information here that I think many will find interesting. And you bring it together, and it'll open people's minds so that they do have a sense of choice of where they'd like to see the universal consciousness go. Let's learn from the mistakes. All right now everybody says we're going through a purification process, which is cyclic if you read these books. And let's, with open eyes, decide, make the right choices, and as you have said, co-create another golden age. So it's like I said, these shows were too short, but I wanted to thank you, Frank, and it was fascinating. And I hope to have you back
Thank you very much for the opportunity.
And I hope to have you back next year with your other books.
Oh, please do. Keep me in mind.
Okay. Thank you so much.